It made a lovely ringing sound far away through the big woods. The woods were dark and silent, and the trees stood still as though they were listening. Then, from very far away, the sound came back, thin and clear and small, like a little bugle answering the big one. "Listen," Uncle George said. "Isn't that pretty?" Laura looked at him, but she did not say anything. And when Uncle George stopped blowing the bugle, she ran into the house. Ma and Grandma cleared away the dishes and washed them and swept the hearth, while Aunt Docia and Aunt Ruby made themselves pretty in their room. Laura sat on their bed and watched them comb out their long hair and part it carefully. They parted it from their foreheads to the napes of their necks, and then they parted it across from ear to ear. They braided their back hair in long braids. They braided their back hair. That's a furry woman. I'm just kidding. They braided their back hair in long braids, and they did the braids up carefully in big knots. I guess that went like that. They had washed their hands and faces and scrubbed them well with soap at the wash basin on the bench in the kitchen. They had used store soap, not the slimy, soft, dark brown soap that Grandma made and kept in a big jar for common every day. They fussed for a long time with their front hair, holding up the lamp and looking at their hair in the little looking glass that hung on the long wall. How do they do it on TikTok? All right. They brushed it so smooth on each side of the straight white part that it shone like silk in the lamplight. The little puff on each side shone too, and the ends were coiled and twisted neatly under the big knot in the back. Then they pulled on their beautiful white stockings that they had knit of fine cotton thread in lacy open-work patterns, and they buttoned up their best shoes. They helped each other with their corsets. Aunt Docia pulled as hard as she could on Aunt Ruby's corset strings, and then Aunt Docia hung onto the foot of the bed while Aunt Ruby pulled on hers. "Pull, Ruby, pull," Aunt Docia had said, breathless. "Pull harder." Oh. So Aunt Ruby braced her feet and pulled harder. Aunt Docia kept measuring her waist with her hands, and at last she said, "I guess that's the best you can do." She said, "Caroline says Charles could span her waist with his hands when they were married." Caroline was Laura's ma, and when she heard this, Laura felt proud. Then Aunt Ruby and Aunt Docia put on their flannel petticoats and their plain petticoats and their stiff starched white petticoats with knitted lace all around the flounces, and they put on their beautiful dresses. Aunt Docia's dress was a sprigged print, dark blue, with sprigs of red flowers and green leaves thick upon it. The basque was buttoned down the front with black buttons, which looked so exactly like juicy big blackberries that Laura wanted to taste them. Aunt Ruby's dress was wine-colored calico, covered all over with a feathery pattern in lighter wine color. It buttoned with gold-colored buttons, and every button had a little castle and tree carved on it. Wow, that's a lot of detail. Aunt Docia's pretty white collar was fastened in front with a large round cameo pin which had a lady's head on it, but Aunt Ruby pinned her collar with a red rose made of sealing wax. She had made it herself, on the head of a darning needle which had a broken eye, so it couldn't be used as a needle anymore. They looked lovely, sailing over the floor so smoothly with their large round skirts. Their little waists rose up tight and slender in the middle, and their cheeks were red and their eyes bright under the wings of shining, sleek hair. Ma was beautiful, too, in her dark green delaine with the little leaves that looked like strawberries scattered all over it. The skirt ruffled and flounced and draped and trimmed with knots of dark green ribbon, and nestling at her throat was a gold pin. The pin was flat, as long and as wide as Laura's two biggest fingers, and it was carved all over and scalloped on the edges. Ma looked so rich and fine that Laura was afraid to touch her. People had begun to come. They were coming on foot through the snowy woods with their lanterns, and they were driving up to the door in sleds and in wagons. Sleigh bells were jingling all the time. The big room filled with tall boots and swishing skirts, and ever so many babies were lying in rows on Grandma's bed. Uncle James and Aunt Libby had come with their little girl, whose name was Laura Ingalls, too. The two Lauras leaned on the bed and looked at the babies, and the other Laura said her baby was prettier than baby Carrie. "She's not either," Laura said. "Carrie's the prettiest baby in the whole world." "No, she isn't," the other Laura said. "Yes, she is." "No, she isn't." Ma came sailing over in her fine Delane and said, "Laura!" So neither Laura said anything anymore. Uncle George was blowing his bugle. It made a loud ringing sound in the big room, and Uncle George joked and laughed and danced, blowing the bugle. Then Pa took his fiddle out of its box and began to play.